Are we ready to go?
We're all set.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. As one of our contributors, Rabbi Irwin said, it's a Shechiana moment for all of us. And I'd like to start with a Shana Tova for all of you who celebrate the new year coming up, and for all of you who are celebrating the academic year that is coming up, because I know we have a lot of teachers and professors here as well. Shana Tova, good year for you as well. And I'm so glad to welcome, we have an extraordinary turnout tonight, and of friends and colleagues and people we care about and love. And over half of our contributors are reading tonight. In the interest of giving them enough time to have a reading that that says something, we're not going to have a Q&A. Jacob and I will be hosting question and answer sessions over the course of the year with many of the contributors. So you will have an opportunity later on over the course of this academic and Jewish year to talk with us if you want to, but not this evening. I did want to make one announcement beforehand, before we just go to our wonderful contributors and readers, which is, I know that some of you who have looked to buy this book have had a moment of really bad sticker shock. And I want to say that the book is only available, it's from a small academic press that was not only prestigious, but offered us full editorial support, said to us that whatever we wanted to do, that they would not do any at all editorial interference. That was extremely important to us. We did not want to have this book edited or censored in any way. So that was the reason we chose this press. They have a mission to have the books in libraries and institutions. And I'd love to ask you to ask your local library or university to buy the book. In addition, the publisher, Cambridge Scholars Press, will be making a decision in December about whether to come out with a paperback edition, which will be much more reasonably priced. And we'll be putting together a postcard and letter writing campaign in November to convince our publishers that that's the best way to go forward. If, however, given all that, you still want to buy the hardcover copy, you can write me privately and I'll give you the author's discount of 40%. So that said, with no further ado, I'm going to read my reading, which is from the acknowledgements, and then we'll turn to Dr. Marla Brettschneider, who will talk about her chapter on Leslie Feinberg. We are grateful to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion, CLGS, at the Pacific School of Religion for hosting and providing unstinting support for both the Transkeit Conference and this book. CLGS is committed to giving voice to marginalized cultural communities and has created a structure of roundtables to integrate that commitment into all of our programming. The center is home for an African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, and Latinx roundtable, as well as the Jewish and trans roundtables that produced this anthology. Our colleagues at CLGS know that only genuinely intersectional work can address the lives and concerns of queer people, our families, and our religious and spiritual communities. We understand that our complex individual and communal identities must inform all of our work together. And when we honor the many different facets of who we are as human beings, including our gender identities, sexual orientation, race, class, spirituality, physical abilities, family structures, and cultural backgrounds, we reap the rewards of collective growth and trust. We particularly thank Dr. Bernard Schlager, the director of CLGS, for his extraordinary leadership, assistance, and patience. And we offer a special thanks to Erin Grace Burns for the cover design, to Jonah Gelfin for skillful copy editing, and to Jay Michelson for his assistance with the glossary, as well as really coming up with the idea of the Transkeit Conference in the first place. We also thank the Walter and Elise Haas Fund and its senior program officers, Stephanie Rapp, for their generous financial support. Lastly, as allies to Indigenous Americans, we acknowledge that the conference that led to this volume and the work of writing and editing it almost entirely took place on land stolen by violence, deception, kidnapping, rape, and ultimately the genocide of Native people. We call on our readers to support meaningful reparations for Indigenous and Black Americans. And now I'd like to turn over the speaker to Dr. Marla Brettschneider, who is a professor in political theory with a joint appointment in political science and women's studies at the University of New Hampshire, where she is a founder of its queer studies. She has published numerous award-winning books in Jewish diversity politics and theory, including Jewish Feminism and Intersectionality, The Family Flamboyant, Race, Politics, Queer Families, Jewish Lives, and LGBTQ Politics, a Critical Reader. Marla?
Okay, all good now? Well, and to be the first one to speak when I can't wait to hear everybody else. Thank you and congratulations, Ms. Altov, on the book, to our amazing co-editors. And thank you, Jane, for introducing me, and to all of the contributors. This is such an important work, and now we all have it to make use of, and share it, which is amazing. And it was great to me that, for me, that Jane agreed to have me share some of my work on Leslie Feinberg, as they said of themselves that she was an anti-racist, working class, secular Jewish, transgender, lesbian, female, revolutionary communist, and as such, an activist, writer, organizer, and thinker, also with years in blue collar and temporary work. Feinberg sometimes did live as a man and often as a trans person, when that was possible. As a self-defined butch lesbian and transgender lesbian, she wasn't simply flexible on her pronouns. She had a very clear orientation that was mostly based on dignity, which was key to all her politics, and effective political work. And towards the end, she had said that, there's a quote, "I care which pronoun is used, but people have been respectful to me with the wrong pronoun and disrespectful to me with the right one. It matters whether someone is using the pronoun as a bigot or if they are trying to demonstrate respect." So I'm gonna flip around her different choices. Feinberg was born in 1949 in Kansas City, Missouri, and was raised in a Jewish working class in Buffalo, New York, family in Buffalo, New York, where oddly enough, I'm headed tomorrow to give a talk on my work on Jewish anarchist feminist Emma Goldman due to her connection to Buffalo. So who would have thunk I have two Buffalo Jewish radicals day after day? Lucky me. Feinberg likely got tick-borne Lyme disease as early as the 1970s, but couldn't really get adequate medical care due in large part to being trans and their fears of judgment of treatment by medical personnel. Later in life, she was public about illness with a focus on disability art and class consciousness, and she died in the fall of 2014, a sad time for so many of us. In her younger adult years in Buffalo, she was working at various low-wage jobs and got involved with the Workers' World Party at a Palestine event. She began writing for the party's magazine in the 70s, and eventually she moved to New York City and continued her activism, personal life writing there. She's published quite a bit in addition to her organizing and street activism. Her first novel that many of you might know was published in 1993, Stone Butch Blues. It is a work of fiction, though heavily reliant on her own life experience. She hadn't become a feminist and a radical in the context of explicitly Jewish feminists and political radicals, but she always kept her Jewishness at the top of her self-understanding and work. Stone Butch Blues came out into an emerging and ready historical moment of Jewish and general activists and a reading public of feminists, Jews, queers, lesbians, trans folk, and class warriors. It became very popular, won the Lambda Literary Award and the American Library Association Gay and Lesbian Book Award. And she's won many, many awards since then. So my work on Feinberg, which is just such a treat to get to share even this little part because the chapter's much longer, is on Feinberg, shows the way that she's self-defined are all co-constructed with her politics and her activism. And not everybody can really do that. And she was amazing as it. As he learned along her way as a radical, he also clarified her self-identities and deepened her knowledge in who she was and who her peoples are and have been historically. And this research and process of self-development then depended and broadened her capacity for political work. I was always a fan, but it's really been amazing to get to do a serious study of her, and which is ongoing for me, as she is so clear on this mutually reinforcing relationship between her personal growth, her politics, and what she was capable of politically. As Jane just said, Feinberg is actually a great example if one wants to do a deep dive into what some people today call intersectionality, given the ways you work consciously with their multiple and co-constructed identities, along with their political activism and thinking. And she also used this mutually reinforcing approach in her multivalent and nuanced political work. It is so complex and so gorgeous if you haven't read or looked at any of Feinberg's legacy recently. So in this, she and her legacies in this Jewish context, they are excellent sources for people to learn specifically about Jews and Jewish history. And not everybody knows that really Feinberg is situated so deeply in such main struggles and identifiers and historical moments of at least Ashkenazi Jews, which is her background. And so that is, it's a great study, and I recommend it to anybody else. As part of her legacy, she wrote 3 more books of nonfiction and a second work of fiction, Drag King Dreams. Drag King Dreams is both really different from Stone Butch Blues, but it's also somewhat autobiographical. And interestingly, therefore, one is at the very beginning of her career and one is towards the end of her life. It shows her development over these decades of her life. And we can see that development across the books most keenly, actually, when we pay attention carefully to some of the Jewish aspects of the work. And that's all I have time to say, and I'm delighted to hear everybody else.
Thank you, Marla. I'd like to invite Zebulon Hurst. He's a Black American interdisciplinary scholar, poet, and artist. His work revolves around themes of Blackness, queerness, rupture, self-sublimation, and Doikite, diasporism. He served as on the cultural organizing team in Linky Fliegel, a radical queer diasporist Jewish farming project in 5780. Zebulon?
Hi, good evening. I'm going to read an abridged version of my chapter in Transkeit. I'm so glad to be here, and I'll just get started. Elul 5780 comes at the end of a year whose realities have been the things of nightmares. How else can one describe the past 12 months, whose consistent news is that of death, cruelty, arrogance, and hatred? Upwards of 800,000 lives have come to an untimely end due to a pandemic that has laid bare the brokenness built into systems that once masqueraded as protective. The jig is up. I typed this essay at a table on occupied Chochenyo Ohlone land, complicit in the legacy of settler colonialism here on Turtle Island. As I write, Gaza is under a blockade that prevents the distribution of medication, dry goods, and produce. This week, hundreds of Palestinians have contracted COVID-19, while international bodies remain inert. Ongoing violence and displacement remains normalized in the super narratives we call history. Self-identified progressive circles will continue to associate resilience or adaptation with dispossessed people, failing to account for the atrocities that precipitate survivorhood. Just because the myth of linear time beckons us to equate longevity with progress doesn't mean that we are automatically on an upward trajectory of liberty. My ancestors began to be trafficked to this continent over 400 years ago. I am the undeniable evidence of all manners of theft, not only of language, but of culture, ritual, time, rest, and sexual agency. Theft of breath, of life. I am, as are all Black people who descend from survivors of the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery in the US, holding in the heart of my heart two truths. I am both the alchemist and the crucible. I cannot separate my Blackness from my Jewishness. My queerness and my transness are Black. I experience the fallacy of the binary not in theory, but in body. I am simultaneously hypervisible and invisible. I am everywhere and nowhere, doubly diasporic and doubly pained. Treading the murky waters of assumption and stereotype at every introduction is lonely and exhausting. It is commonplace that I'm the only Black person in Jewish spaces. Or if I'm not the only Black person, I'm likely to be the only trans person. What does that feel like? Before lockdown began, I would have described it as uncomfortable, more of a nuisance than anything. But now, nearly 6 months without consistent physical touch, it feels like a hole in the gut. I started turning off the view self feature on video conferencing platforms months ago. It became enraging, seeing the square containing my complexion marooned in a sea of sameness. I grew up in semi-rural Iowa, fixated on the button-nosed, blue-eyed, and straight-haired. Not quite Pecola breedlove, I received incessant messaging that my physicality and spirituality were flawed. I learned to retreat inside of myself, to fold the hastily written script of comebacks in the quiet room in the back of my mind. To be brave, some would say, is to take up space. A few years into my medical transition, I decided to wear a sundress on a muggy Chicago summer morning. My routine was the same as ever. I half jogged the 12-minute walk from my home to the Argyle Red Line station and made it to the upper platform with a few minutes to spare. It was a private joy of mine to embody femininity in this way. A man approached me asking about some such inane thing as men do when they're trying to charm someone. When cisgender men find me attractive, especially on days where I'm presenting more feminine, I'm on high alert. He complimented my hair. I made sure to pitch my voice a bit higher as I engaged in neutral banter with him. I was evasive about my destination and cognizant of the underlying dynamics between us. It struck me suddenly how he had almost definitely seen me before. It reminds me of the shul I attended on Chicago's North Side. I spent many Friday evenings pretending to pore over the timeline spanning the foyer, detailing the synagogue's history. Even though I attended Friday Shabbat service like clockwork, never without a handwritten name tag with my pronouns, he and they. And that's my time. Thank you all for being here and for listening. And I'm so excited to hear from everyone else. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Zeb's essay is so great that you only got to hear like less than half of it. I hope buy the book or get your library to do so you can hear the rest of it. Rabbi Susan Goldberg is the founder of Nefesh, an open-hearted spiritual community capturing the energy and vitality of LA's East Side. A fourth-generation Angelina raised in Red Hill, she has a special focus on revitalizing LA's East Side Jewish community to again be an active part of the multicultural beauty of these neighborhoods. Rabbi Goldberg has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, Lilith Magazine, the New York Times, Pasadena Magazine, the Jewish Journal, Southern California Public Radio, and much more. Susan?
Hi, thank you. Jane. Thank you for doing this and for everyone who contributed. It's a joy to be with you. I'm going to start my timer as well. So, you know, rabbis need a timer. I'm really looking forward to getting to hear everyone and to read all the pieces. I was just thinking that all of us need to find all of our librarian friends. I think that might be an action step coming out of this event, and make sure that their libraries are going to order this book. So I'm going to read a little bit of what I wrote, and just want to say that it has been a while since the conference that the Transkeit conference that a lot of these pieces came out of, that this piece came out of for me. And this piece is called Being an Evolving Ally. And I already feel, going back and reading this, because it's from some time ago, that I have continued to evolve. Thank God, and hope to continue to. So I'll read a little bit inside of this piece. I was the rabbi consultant for Transparent, and this is part of what this is about. It was an honor to be part of the unfolding journey that was the groundbreaking show Transparent as its rabbi consultant. It was an honor to get to witness and support my friend and congregant, Joey Soloway, and the collection of wonderful humans they brought together in a journey filled with growth and challenge, and creation and recreation, and humor and hard work and amazement. As the show's rabbi consultant, I drew out Jewish themes and taught texts, and studied with the writers as a group and with individual writers and actors, read scripts, gave notes, worked with actors on meaning, ritual, and language, and worked with the costume design, set, and other production needs. And I also witnessed and supported with ritual and blessing and tears and celebration, holding the spiritual journey of those creating the show and of the characters they brought to life. Another aspect of my rabbinic role in relationship to Transparent has been to represent the show and engage in discussion in Jewish spaces, such as synagogues, federations, and also academic conferences. In these areas, I've generally been asked to focus on two aspects. One is talking about representation of Jewishness in media and how that may or may not be changing. And the other was to explore the Jewish themes that we had intentionally woven into the arc of the characters and into the arc of a season. And there are many, many of them, I'll just say, so it was hard to capture just a few, but here are some of them. The Torah portion, Lech Lecha, and the imperative of that journey when Abraham and Sarah are told to leave their father's house to go to an unknown land. Also the realm of Midbar, of wilderness, a spiritual state of navigating the unknown, and many other evocative Jewish ideas, sacred calendar moments and rituals, Yom Kippur and Pesach and Mikvah, as transformation, as possibility, as retreat, Taharash, Shiva, death rituals, Shabbat, Havdalah, synagogue community, politics, challenge, historical communal trauma, memory, and healing. It was a show overflowing with Jewish tradition, teachings, and cultural expressions as experienced by the often infuriating and always captivating Pfefferman family. There's much to say about all of the above, but for this piece, I would like to focus on a third aspect of what I would share in Jewish communal spaces. It was rarely on the explicit agenda of the event, but for me as an ally, it's always present to increase awareness, to confront bias, to make and work for safer spaces for trans and non-binary and gender fluid Jews, and also obviously folks who are not Jewish in our community. In this area, I see both the possibility of growth and the tremendous need for it. And it's here that I've heard a sentiment expressed that took me by surprise and sits at the intersection of internalized Jewish hiding and transphobia. The sentiment expressed goes something like this. There's so many Jewish parts of the show, and clearly it's about a Jewish family, but why did the trans part have to be in it? Why not just do the Jewish part or the trans part? Why are they together in one show? The first time I heard the comment, I asked to hear it again because I was trying to make sense of it. As I asked follow-up questions, I realized some of the layers that were alive in the question and began to unpack from what I was hearing. This is what I began to unpack. We so rarely get seen. And when we do, we need to be so careful how we're seen. We feel uncomfortable about being seen, equated with trans people. We don't want to bring shame to ourselves or discomfort to the goyim watching it. We don't want Jews to see us this way. It's a familiar trope in the Jewish community, this shanda to the goyim idea. And I go a little bit about where that comes from, but I wanted to know, why was that impulse here? Why was it relating to covering up here? What was there to cover up? And my heart broke as I asked the follow-up questions and began to put together what they were saying. Oh, I see. They're feeling that to be trans is to bring shame on us. In the sadness, I felt also glad that it was me hearing this and not a trans person in our community. I can feel the pain as I held those that I love in my life, who this was directed towards. And I could also feel the role of the magain, the shield that I could be in this moment to receive and to protect. Then I go a little bit about my own need for a shield in my own life as a child in queer family, being raised that way and the hiding, but I'll skip that and just go to, I could feel there was something else in the comments in these Jewish communal discussions. It was asserting that there should be a forced invisibility, to not see, to not acknowledge, to not claim. And it feels even more insidious. This says, hi, don't be heard, don't be seen, you're not really here. And transparent was groundbreaking for many reasons, but main one was for this reality. It brought a trans forward to be seen and for it to allow other stories to be seen. And the origins of transparent began with Joey's parent, a Jewish family with a trans parent. When people were asking for it not to be Jewish and trans, they were wanting to make invisible the very real lives of trans Jews. And my time is about to run out, but I then tell another story of being in a session where I was sharing about, it was Hanukkah and it was an LA Jewish Federation event. And I brought up the idea of Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, that the candle, the light of God, is the soul of a human. And in this teaching, I shared about connecting our souls to that of the divine. And I gave some examples. And one of them was the band Schmeckel. I don't know if anybody remembers that band. From what I understand, they're not together anymore, sadly. But I found that what they were doing was connecting to their souls to that of the divine through music and Yiddishkeit. And it was a beautiful example of this verse. And then I go on to say the fight that I got in with the person who wanted to confront me.
Don't give it all away.
I won't. More in the article.
Okay. Read the book. Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. Susan's having vertigo problems, and so it was particularly wonderful for you to join us today. I really appreciate you making the extra effort. Our next reader is Rabbi Erwin Keller, is the spiritual leader of Congregation Ner Shalom in Sonoma County, California. Since 2008, it's unbelievable it's been that long, Erwin. His past work included LGBTQI and HIV advocacy. He authored Chicago's first gay rights law in effect since 1989, directed an AIDS legal services organization in San Francisco, and was a founder and for 21 years, a performer with the Kinsey Six, America's favorite dragapella beauty shop quartet. Reb Erwin's writings can be found on his blog, It Sucks Well, and you can give more of a commercial for yourself if you want when you speak. Go ahead, Erwin.
Thank you, Rabbi Jane.
Oh, wait, I have to say one other thing is that I had a sad personal tragedy just as this program was being put together, and Erwin stepped in and really did some, and I also want to say Jakob, who is the co-editor of this book, has been downed with COVID for weeks and weeks, having a very bad case of COVID, and I'm very glad he can be with us tonight. And Erwin really stepped in to put this together and did so much of the work of this evening, and I want to thank you for that as well, Erwin.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jane, and it was an honor to do that. So, yes, I am Erwin Keller, the touted drag queen rabbi of the press release. But let's not start with my wardrobe. Let's start with my bookshelf, because I own 2 volumes of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, a 21-volume tome unlocking the language of Nebuchadnezzar. I found these 2 orphans in the 1980s in a used bookstore in Chicago. They were the letters I and K, my initials, They were meant to be found by me. I spirited them home and reached for the K volume, and it fell open to the word kulu'u, kulu'u, actor, member of the temple personnel of Ishtar, performing dances and music. And then I scanned through the appearances of that word in ancient inscriptions, and I saw this sentence, Sha takbu uma kulu'u la zikaru shu, which they translated as, he is a kulu'u, he is not a zikaru, that's zachar in Hebrew. He is not a he-man. And I stopped short, looking around me as if the dictionary had been spying on me, because I was also not a he-man. I grew up a sissy, a girly boy. In my childhood play, I was always a girl, a practice I maintained but took underground when I learned it was transgression. That part of me had no public voice and no real role models until my late 20s. In 1987, I attended the National Civil Disobedience at the Supreme Court, protesting the gay-hating Bowers versus Hardwick decision. And there I saw a group of radical fairies, men with beards and skirts and army boots and glitter, getting carried off the steps by police. They were doing holy work in their protest. They were shamans and they knew it. Kulu'u, I muttered with admiration. Then in my early 30s, a friend invited me to a concert in drag, and that night, the idea for the Kinsey Six, America's favorite dragapella beauty shop quartet, was hatched, and I would become the character known as Winnie for 21 years. In her shoes, in her dresses and wigs, I at last had the chance to be me. I was me as Winnie more than I had ever been in a suit. And while we were not explicitly doing spiritual work, I noticed that when we did children's shows, which we occasionally did, mothers would hand me their babies and toddlers to hold, as if asking for a blessing for them in case they turned out to be queer. In the 1990s, as part of a queer minyan in the Bay Area, I began wearing skirts on Shabbat. This became my enduring practice, one which I have carried with me into the synagogue and onto the bima. I dress in radical fairy style, tie, boots, kippah, and skirt, mixing gender markers like intermingled species in a treif of field. But I didn't want my skirts to be treif. I wanted to find my own forebears, my transcestors in Judaism. How come, I thought, all the other ancient Near Eastern cultures had kulu'u and the like, but not us? And then I spotted them hiding in plain sight. In Deuteronomy, just one chapter after the prohibition on cross-dressing, we find, Lo tihiyeh kadesha mibnot Yisrael, velo yihiyeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. No Israelite woman shall be a kadesha, and no Israelite man shall be a kadesh. And suddenly the girly man priestess was looking right back at me across 3,000 years. They were not absent from our past. There they were, and we meet them only as they are being outlawed. The Kadesh, which should mean holy or consecrated one, gets commonly translated as male cult prostitute or even sodomite. But even where the sages focused on the sexual role of the Kadeshim and Kadeshot, there's also an awareness of some gender nonconformity. Onkelos in the 2nd century translates the same verse into Aramaic as La tehe ita mi beit Yisrael ligvar aved, vela yisaf gavra mi bnei Yisrael ita ama. An Israelite woman shall not become a serving man, and an Israelite man shall not become a maidservant. The 4th century Latin Vulgate swings both ways. Translating Deuteronomy, it calls the Kadesh scortator or fornicator, but 5 other times it translates Kadeshim as effeminati. It's hard to know if this is meant disparagingly or just descriptively, but either way, the Vulgate makes clear its understanding that it is not the sexual role of the Kadeshim, but their effeminacy that characterizes them and that makes them targets for Deuteronomy's violence. These are painful texts for Jewish girly men to read. In them, we see our image, and we see our 2 lineages, the Jewish one and the queer one, with the former bragging about stamping out the latter. I feel my gut clench as I imagine the Kadeshim routed, assaulted, killed like too many sissies and transgender people today, attacked by mobs claiming to speak in God's name. So now I wear my skirt on the bima in their name. 1 year during Parashat Yitro, the Torah portion in which God promises that we would be a nation of priests, I stood in shul in my skirt and talked about the Kadeshim, how maybe they were girly men like me, and how effeminati was a term I would be happy to reclaim. An 11-year-old I'd never met came up to me at Oneg Shabbat, told me they were gender fluid, and said, I want to be part of the society of effeminati too. And thus the tribe is reborn.
Thank you, Erwin. And next up is Fern. Fern, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
Um,
I'm sorry, we had a little bit of a glitch. So can I do your bio at the end of your presentation?
sure, that's
Thanks,
fine.
Fern.
So, as a queer and genderqueer person, my experience of gender really resonates with what contemporary rabbi and philosopher Marla Awaknin, in discussing the arc of the Holy of Holies, calls the dynamism of meaning, or a supreme refusal of thematization. The cherubim, the two angels who were contiguous with the cover of that ark, which was the central object of the Holy of Holies within the Mishkan, the traveling sanctuary, and later the temple, are the main topic of the piece that I contribute to Transkeit. I'm going to focus primarily on the varieties of gender and the sacred figure of these cherubim, which are themselves a supreme refusal of thematization. I'll give a brief and greatly simplified synopsis of this piece. So first, a teaching from the Midrash, which says, at the time that the Holy Blessed One created the primordial human, God created it androgynos, as it is said in Genesis, male and female, God created them. At the time that the Holy Blessed One created the primordial human, God created it with two faces, du partsufim, then split it and made two backs, a back for here and a back for there. That is, the primordial human was created intersex. And since it's also written in Genesis that God created the human in the divine image, we might imagine that God's own self, so to speak, is intersex also. We'll return to this image and to the term du partsufim, Aramaic for two faces or two interfaces, in a moment. The cherubim on the art cover are imagined sometimes as breasts, which is a very common metaphor in Jewish tradition. Midrash often attributes lactating breasts, giving of milk, and the flow of Torah to all genders of our ancestors and sages. The two cherubim are to be made of one piece of gold together with the art cover. Like breasts to a baby, from one perspective, they appear to be two separate beings, but with a step back, it's clear they're part of one larger entity, perhaps a hint at the interconnectedness of all being. The Talmud says the cherubim stood by a miracle. The Zohar interprets the miraculous nature of the cherubim by commenting on a line in Exodus: the cherubim shall be spreading wings above, sheltering the cover with their wings. The Zohar explains, when holiness was manifested upon them, they raised their wings on their own, spreading them and shielding the cover. Afterwards, they folded their wings, resting them on their bodies, as it is written, the cherubim shall be spreading wings above, that is, actively spreading, not with wings spread, sheltering the cover with their wings, actively, not with sheltering wings. For they stood miraculously, rejoicing in Shekhinah. Daniel Abrams, in his book, The Divine Female Body in Kabbalah, based on a passage from the Tikkunei Zohar, which teaches that the cherubim's wings were lips, teaches that the cherubim's wings are a metaphor for the lips of the vulva that flutter or arouse and spread, that is, separate in two, and not by means of the male enacting his power or his will to spread them in entering into the Holy of Holies. The Zohar emphasizes, he says, how the sexual arousal of the female body is the fruit of her own will and not victory at the hands of the male. As it is written, spreading and not were spread, sheltering and not were sheltered. The wings of the cherubim, he says, articulate the entirety of female arousal, which is the Shekhinah dwelling and identified with the Holy of Holies at the time of favor. The Talmud teaches that during the festivals, the cherubim would intertwine together in loving embrace, evoking divine love for the people who would witness this event. The Tikkunei Zohar explains that at this time, the cherubim were uniting like the verse from Song of Songs, let me kiss him with the kisses of his mouth. Sorry, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, which are simultaneously, it says, two pairs of lips kissing, two pairs of wings intertwining, two beings, each with two faces uniting, two pairs of arms embracing, each becoming united in a fourfold being. Simultaneously, the four-winged Chayot angel that appears in prophetic visions, and the four-lettered names of God, the Tetragrammaton Yud-He-Vav-He, and the name Adonai, joining together. And Daniel Abrams adds another layer of meaning here. The cherubim that are the two mouths or pairs of lips and the divine names are also the du partsufim, the two faces or interfaces of the primordial androgynos, human and divine. The unification of the cherubim, then, is a rejoining of the primordial non-binary human, and at the same time, a unification of the divine name or presence. And it's not that one cherub is associated with the name Yod-He-Vav-He and the other with Adonai, but rather each has half of each God name, and when they join, they unify the names of God. The way the letters are associated with gender, it turns out that the unification of the cherubim is not a unification of a male cherub and a female cherub, but rather the two cherubim each have a male lip and a female lip. That is, two genderqueer cherubim in an act of mutual arousal and desire unify to create the primordial human, the name of God, and the most sacred space in the Jewish religion, the Holy of Holies. Each glimpse we get of the cherubim is a different reading, a different meaning. And so it is with each of us, perhaps with each bit of reality, each glimpse a new reading, a new configuration of gender, of meaning, of differentiation within unification, a new aspect of divine presence, a new opportunity for the divine voice to come through.
Thank you, Fern. Rabbi Fern Feldman teaches in a variety of venues, including Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal, where she was ordained in 2003. Fern, as we can see from her articulate and educated presentation. She also holds a degree in French literature, works as a nurse practitioner in the harm reduction field, as a spiritual director, ritual leader, hypnotherapist, and life coach. Her writings include Gender and Indeterminacy in Jewish Questions from Queer in Jewish Mystical Imagery, and Unsettling Science and Religion, Contributions and Questions from Queer Studies. She also has written To Dwell in the Thick Darkness, the Sacred Dark in Jewish Thought. We had a teeny glitch tonight in that Sean Kahn, who's with us from London, he and I somehow didn't have full communication, and he didn't realize he was supposed to do a reading. So it's 2 a.m. and he's like, it's 2:30, right? 2:45. And it's like, he can't do it. So he's told us that he's very happy to say hi and maybe say a few words, but not a reading. So with no further ado, here you go.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm from the other side of the world for some of you. Can you all hear me? Yeah, great. I just really wanted to say hi to everyone, and it's such an amazing thing to be part of this publication, and it's good to see some of the faces that I know, and I miss you all, and we've all been through a lot in those past years. It's a very intense time here in the UK at the moment, and makes me double tired for many reasons, and you know what's going on politically, and we've just had a shift and the Queen and everything that's all happening at the moment. So this is a really intense time, but I just also wanted to say that in terms of Transkeit, for me, this is also as somebody here, a really important publication. The amount of transphobia in the Jewish LGBT and Jewish community in the UK is immense. I just had a message this weekend from a anti-Semitism conference that's happening in the next few days here, which has actually Jewish presentations that go that compare the Holocaust with trans affirmative messages, and these are actually these are part of an official anti-Semitism conference, and it's just really insane what's going on here. Maybe I think this is just an idea. I'm like popping into this incredibly amazing, positive, affirmative event. I'm sorry about that, but I just wanted to say that's why this is so important to have Transkeit and this community here, because we need to really support each other, because there is stuff happening that is just incredible. And so thank you. I'm sorry, I just need to slip into bed and wake up for the funeral stuff with the Jewish community is a big thing here. And thank you so much. Please do read my essay and let me know what you think. It's a personal story. I'm really into oral history and collecting stories, and bless you all. And I hope to see you all in person again sometime soon. Thank you. Good night,
Thank
Leila Tov.
you. Go get some sleep. Our next contributor and reader is Rabbi Dr. Levi Ethan Alter, and is the spiritual leader of his congregation of Yiddish-speaking Holocaust survivors and the CEO of a healthcare corporation. His previous professional experience includes being on the clinical faculty of UCLA Medical Center and a university department chair. He is an internationally sought-after expert on intersex issues, with interviews on Logo, MTV, MSNBC, Newsweek, BBC Radio, and many other documentaries and media appearances, and the fourth of 5 generations of intersex individuals in his family.
Thank you very much. First of all, I am absolutely thrilled that we're having this opportunity tonight, and that the book is also finally out. I really look forward to reading everyone's essays, and I've been very much enjoying each of the speakers tonight. I resonate with what everyone has been saying, particularly Fern, who talked about some intersexuality, but also specifically with intersexed people, because a lot of times I am the only intersexed person that's identified anyway in our LGBT spaces and our trans spaces. Intersex organizing lags very far behind trans organizing, just as trans organizing lags behind in terms of representation, funding, infrastructure, and a lot of other necessities. And we say things like nothing about us without us. To be at the table, though, you need to be in the room, and to be in the room, you sort of have to be in the building. And if you're going to be in the building, I want to mention a quotation that's part of my essay in the book from Sefer Yeshayahu, who says Hashem to the Saris, which is a biblical name for we're not quite sure, but intersex perhaps, maybe LGBT in some way, gender different in some way. Unto them I will give in my temple. So at least we're in the building here, within my walls. So we're very intimately within the building. We're actually the structure of the building. A yad vashem, a hand, and a name. That's from the book of Isaiah, chapter 56, verses 3-5. So when we're talking about this, we know when the tabernacle and the temple were built, people were invited to participate in the building by making contributions. And then the interesting turn of phrase, not that God says, I will dwell in it. He says, she says, they say, I will dwell in them, among them. And so that means within us, each individually, but it also means between us, like Fern was talking about between the Krovim, that we are in our making of community, finally, fully whole. And going back to Les Feinberg, I remember when I read Stone Butch Blues, and Les was saying the fictional character Jess is in Hebrew school sitting there wearing a dress, and I'm the boy who went to school in a dress. So I very much identified with that. For the first time, as a Jewish person and an intersex or trans person, I saw myself actually reflected in a book. And I hope with Transkeit, some of our readers in a library where it's going will find it and find themselves for the first time in their lives. Thanks to every one of the authors so much, reflected in a book. But back specifically to intersex, we're talking about with something like non-classical congenital adrenal hyperplasia, an incidence of about 1 in 100 in the general population, but it goes to 1 in 27 in the Ashkenazi Jewish population, which means if you happen to have a classroom of 30 Jewish students at a Hebrew school, in every single one of those classrooms, you're going to have an intersex child, just with this one of 86 different intersexed conditions alone, child there. However, we're not really at the table because most of us don't know who we are. Many of us are not diagnosed. We also don't really have a community. In many ways, it's still kind of in formation, and being in formation doesn't really reach out much to gather in people who are not a part of it. And how could you if you don't even know that you're a part of it? But because I was diagnosed, it doesn't really help much if you actually get diagnosed, because my parents were told to lie to me and to keep secrets from me. And it's been very common when we've had operations, people didn't tell us what the operation really was for. I was told I was having my appendix out, and you get diagnosed, but you have this medical disempowerment that happens. What are we asking for with a yad? We're asking for the power of our hand to be able to do something, but you're disempowered because you're decommunified. There is, with this secrecy and this shame and isolation, you can't find your tribe. Erwin was talking about, finding his tribe. You cannot find your people when you're decommunified by being isolated with this secrecy and disempowerment. So a part of having any kind of action is to take the power out of the hands of medical a group of doctors who have never done any follow-up studies. So they've never listened to the fact that their interventions are generally harmful, almost always. I haven't met an intersex person yet who has told me that they're pleased with the fact that what nature gave them, how Hashem made us, was taken away from us and things were chopped off and all of that. Also, a lot of NCCAH babies, if the NCCAH is discovered, the baby will be given massive doses of female hormones just to make sure there's no butches, there's no dykes, no tomboys, no masculine people, no F to M. No. These are who we say they are. And this disempowerment is coming from doctors. It's also coming from the legal community, where it's very difficult to change our names, to change our documents. States are making it harder. They're making it easier to do intersex surgeries that are non-consensual. They actually carve out things in the law that practically mandate it. And meanwhile, they're making it difficult not only for trans people and trans kids to get any kind of care, but also making it legally harder for us to correct our documents. And that's the second part of this, having a Yad Vashem. They go together, because how can you have any power if even the power to name yourself is taken away? And I feel that the term intersex is the least offensive of the others. Originally, we were called hermaphrodites. And then later, after intersex, we were called disorders of sexual development. And I so do not feel like a disorder. Like Fern said, intersex creature, human being, and humanity as a whole, the image of God is intersexed. God is not disordered, and God does not make disordered people. So nobody ever asked me my opinion about whether I wanted to be known as a disorder of sexual development. But when we have both our power, and we're no longer disempowered and decommunified, maybe then we will also be able to find a beautiful name for ourselves. But in the meantime, I so loved this, the Yud, the K, the Vav, and the K, when they're all united, they create the name of Hashem. Perhaps the best way for us to have our name is to have a name that's all inclusive of every gender and every person who longs for having the power to be ourselves and to name ourselves. So thank you, and I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Thank you. That your essay, which tells actually the personal story of some of the politics that you just shared with us. Again, somewhat what Marla said about Les, is a very powerful essay in the book in terms of profound personal sharing. And I hope that everyone here will have a chance to read it. Next, our next speaker is Martin Rawlings Fine, and is a Jewish bisexual trans man, father of two, and filmmaker. His 3 documentary shorts, Clocked: An Oral History, Who You Callin' Queer, and Choosing to Be Chosen, have been used as catalysts for discussions and workshops in Santa Clara, San Francisco, Berkeley, and New York City. Martin is a graduate of New College of California, the Davenin Leadership Training Institute, and earned his advanced degrees in Jewish Studies from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Martin?
Can you hear me? That's the first thing we ask. Hello, everyone. As you can tell, you can call me Marty, by the way. I'm thrilled to meet all of you in your Zoom boxes. First, I thank Rabbi Litman and Reverend Hero-Shaw for including my writing in this anthology. It is the first of 3 books I've written for that are coming out this year, which is pretty exciting for me. Baruch Hashem. My piece in this book is called Choosing to be Chosen, Striking Similarities Between Conversion and Transition. It has to do with a short film that I screened during the Transkeit conference and has become a pathway for an understanding between LGBTQ and Jewish realities and the intersection of those. And I'm going to paraphrase some of my introduction for you this evening. There are striking similarities between conversion and transition involving social connection, changing of names, surgical and ritual interventions, supporters, gatekeepers, sometimes in between folks who are ambivalent, all of this above, and conversion to Judaism and transition in gender are transformative endeavors that reimagine how others will interact with our religion and our gender and how we interact with them. We can try on Judaism's rituals, prayers, and other elements until we feel safe and comfortable, just as trans and gender expansive people might try on clothing or present themselves as their authentic selves and add on or take away mannerisms until they feel just right. Choosing to be Chosen began, like many other projects I've done, throughout interviews. It was a part of an interview that I was conducting on another subject. I was actually interning at Access SF in college, and the showrunner on the TV show called Agency. And during the interviews for the program, the person talked about his steps to conversion, and I said that it sounded like he was transitioning to Judaism as if it were a gender, and the notion really held for me. And I began to interview people about their experiences with touch points of delving into Jewish life, either appearing before their Beit Din or their circumcision or Hatafat Brit, or taking a drop of blood from where the circ site is usually, or going to the immersion in the mikveh or ritual bath, and talking to faith leaders who hold their Jewish future in their hands. This film took various shapes. At first, it was an online vlog, right, with hours of edited interviews just up on the web. And then I cast a more extensive net to find more LGBTQ participants. And finally, the film took shape. The broader net also captured the film's first hostile and threatening emails. A screed from a cisgender man saying the film would ruin the participants' lives by outing them as both converts and LGBTQ. I didn't know which was worse for him, whether they were LGBTQ converts or that they were even converts in any way. He seemed ruffled by both aspects of that. A similar email said the film put a stumbling block before the blind, as in Leviticus 19:14, a biblical prohibition against causing another to sin. These letters troubled me, and as a filmmaker and as a Jewish trans man, not wanting to harm the wonderful people who entrusted me with their stories and their participants. And so I had a discussion with them, and I rightly continued. As the film was completed, I began to interview trans-specific subjects and wound down the production. But in 2015, the film screened at the American Academy of Religion, the Western Regional Conference, and it was called Queer in California. In the rough. And in 2016, it screened at this conference. And again in 2019, the Trans Jews Are Here convening in New York City. I wouldn't consider this film a pathway to completely understanding all the issues trans and gender expansive people face. It's only a jumping off point to find the truth about our journey through choosing to be chosen. When Rabbi Litman asked me to write up this piece for the published work here, I just about fell over and started to write as much as I could about how a conversion mirrors transition and vice versa. And I hope that you will like the work and read the book and get it out to your networks. Thank you very much, and Laila Tov.
Thank you, Martin. Our next reader is the first chapter in the book, which is about starting, with the Bible, starting with the Tanakh. Rabbi Rona Matlow is a retired Navy nuclear power engineering officer and disabled veteran. Z identifies as a gender punk, non-binary, transgender woman and uses Z, her pronouns. Rona serves the community as an activist, advocate, educator, and counselor. Rona?
Right. Thank you, Jane. Okay, so yeah, I'm coming to you from Las Vegas, where we occupy the Southern Paiute lands, among other native territories that were taken in the land grabs in the 1800s, of course. I am currently a Doctor of Ministry student at PSR after having collected a whole bunch of other graduate degrees. And of course, my mother of blessed memory called me a perpetual student, so I have to live up to that. And I'm working on Bible scholarship. And I do consider myself to be a scholar of Bible. When I work on Bible scholarship, I always start by writing my own translation of whatever verse I'm working on. And the reason I do that is because every translation that I've found carries baggage. And every writer has bias, and there are issues with translating from one language to another. And when you're looking at these books, you can see, for instance, if you look at the JPS, it is what Seidman calls sense for sense. What I describe it as is kind of like rounding off the corners, and you don't get the full impact of every word. And so, for instance, when you read Leviticus 18:22, which I address in my chapter, if you look at what is written in any translation, half the words are missing because of the way it's translated. If you look at a Christian Bible, you will see tremendous variations from what the original text says, and that creates huge problems because the Christians then turn around and attack Jews and disabled people and queer people and people of color and women and every other marginalized group based on their English translation, which is inaccurate and which can be as many as 10 generations removed from the original text. And even when you go all the way back to St. Jerome in the 4th century, writing the Vulgate in Latin from the Hebrew, there were biases that he imposed in there. He did not write an accurate translation. And then, you look at the King James Version, and it's a political polemic. It's not a religious translation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And even when you look at the New Revised Standard Version, which does use a tremendous amount of scholarship, it still says in the beginning. It doesn't say when God started creating, because they have to support the Christian theology of creation ex nihilo, creating out of nothing, and the fact that it has to match the beginning of John 1, which starts in the Latin in principio. And so Genesis 1 also has to start in principio, in the beginning. But the Hebrew doesn't say anything about starting from time zero. It says, at some point in existence, God started creating with the stuff that was already there. And so it's always important to know what the Hebrew in the Torah or the Aramaic actually says when we look at these things. And it's with that lens that I took a look at Genesis 1:27, which is always misunderstood when looking at queer people. And of course, Fern already read this to look at her section and on the cherubim, the cherubs. but we're going to look at it again. And it said that God created the Adam, and remember that the Adam is a metaphor for humanity. It is not a person. God created the Adam in God's image. In God's image, God created the Adam. And this is doubled for absolute emphasis. Male and female, God created them. Now, when we read this, we note that male and female is a single text block. You can see that because of the way the Masoretes put in the cancellation mark. It's not a binary gender state. It's a single entity that has both male and female properties. And as Fern noted, the Midrash stated that Adam Harishon was androgynous, which means either a person who has male and female characteristics or a person who has indeterminate sex characteristics assigned at birth. And this is very important because then Rashi comes along quoting another Midrash and says that Adam Harishon had two faces. And this is like the Platonic soulmate. And then we see the Midrash also that Fern cited that God came along and split the atom down the middle and created two humans from that. One was male, one was female. Then we have Adam and Eve from that. And so when we think about this theologically, and Fern alluded to this by saying that God is non-binary. I see God as infinite. God is not corporeal. God does not have a body. But if we were going to, for argument's sake, imagine that God could have a body, then God would have infinite possibility of assigned sex because God is infinite. Our verse says that the Adam, humanity, was created in God's image, and that's doubled for absolute emphasis. Therefore, humanity was created with infinite possibility of assigned sex as well, theologically. It wasn't created with a binary of sex, it was created with infinite possibility. And we know this in reality in nature. Or when, Levi was talking about this with his work and his life experience, and Fern was talking about this. I'm also intersex. Most trans people actually experience some kind of intersex or intergender identity that contributes to their transness. And we see, as Levi was talking about, a very high occurrence of this in Ashkenazic circles, along with some other characteristics. And so we go on and we note that this is how we end up with our transness. So when we transition genders, we are not, as the critics say, corrupting God's creation. And Pope Francis said that. He said that right before we had Transkeit, in fact. And I was so disappointed because Pope Francis is a scientist before he's a cleric. And he was supposed to be progressive in his thinking. And he went and said this. We're not corrupting God's creation. We're simply living in the bodies that God created us with. And when I was visiting with my mother of blessed memory in the nursing home, it was a really hot summer day. And I was wearing a tank dress. And it was body hugging. You could see all my curves. And this was right after I had started transitioning. The hormones hadn't even started taking effect yet. But I already had boobs and hips because I always had boobs and hips. I had those secondary characteristics of the female body my whole life because I was intersex. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening. Read the book. It's a wonderful book. And Shana Tova Metzuka.
Thank you, Rona. Our next speaker is Dr. Abigail Faith Rebecca Weissman, Psi doctor is a California psychologist and founder of Waves, a psychological corporation, a San Diego, California, USA-based group practice consisting of clinicians who center trans and queer mental health. More information about Dr. Weissman's practice, including supervision, consultation, continuing education, can be found on the Waves website. Dr. Abby.
I'm
Unmute.
learning how to unmute myself. I'm Abby. It's a pleasure to be here and a complete honor. So I'm going to share a little bit in the time allotted. Let's see. Okay. I am incredibly grateful to be here. This chapter is based on my clinical research project, which is kind of like a mini dissertation of sorts when I did my PsyD in clinical psychology. And I had the opportunity to study something that I really wanted to learn more about, but I wasn't quite sure what. So being who I am and living in San Francisco, I went to Shahar Zahav, to the then Rabbi, Rabbi Angel, who I might have seen here, and said, what does the community need? And my hope upon hopes was that she would say, oh, Abby, you have to study something on lesbians. Lesbians need another voice. And I had just written my master's thesis in human sexuality on lesbian gender identity, femme lesbian gender identity. And I was eager to do something Jewishy and lesbian-y. And she didn't say that. Instead, she said trans Jews. And I was not excited, to put it mildly. I did not want to think about my gender. And I knew that being the contemplative person that I am, that I would have to be thinking about, well, what is my role in this? And how am I going to participate in this study, both to stay motivated and also to do that deep work that psychologists are supposed to do. Think about our biases and how they influence our clinical work and our expertise. But I don't know what it means about me, good girl or otherwise. I said, okay, I'll do that. And I wanted so much to be like, okay, well, I'll just do a lit review, because that's what the people in my programs, they were all doing research on literature, but there wasn't any literature that I could find or read in English. So I decided to interview some folks, 4 individuals, to find out how could I learn from them what it meant to be a good psychologist for trans Jews. And they were amazing and shared so much of their story and their experience. And my chapter talks a little bit about what I learned from them and how I learned to be a better therapist for trans Jews. And of course, I learned a little bit about my gender identity along the way. As other people are sharing here, I was identified as a baby girl, as I was assigned female at birth. And then when I was about 18, found out that my DNA was different than that of a typical cis girl, and was playing with words and terms and couldn't quite figure out where I was located. And so, pardon, you might hear a screaming 4.5-year-old. She's awesome, but it's also right around bedtime by us. So if that comes up, that's what's happening there. And so I was able to kind of question my own identity as I was listening to these very important people. So in the couple minutes left, I just wanted to make sure that I both acknowledged how amazing it was for my participants to take me into their homes and into their lives and share stories with me, and just share so many of their opinions out of the kindness of their hearts. Because in learning more from them, I learned how much crud, for lack of a better clinical term, they and brethren have experienced on the hands of psychologists. And so one of the things they reminded me to say and to talk about was to acknowledge the history of psychologists as gatekeepers, as people who lied, who said, oh yeah, for medical intervention, you just need to come for so-and-so number of sessions, and then to turn around and say, just kidding. Actually, you need to come for more. Actually, I can't write you that letter. And so some of what I talk about in the chapter, and I think more articulately in there, thanks to awesome editors, is about how to acknowledge that I come from this system and how I want to do better. So let's see. I represent countless other psychologists who have kept people from life-saving support by creating anxiety that their story is not fitting into the categories well enough to be able to access medical transition. I hold a lot of power due to a medical and psychological system that is deeply flawed. It removes the client's power over their own body and psyche and reassigns it to a medical and psychological system that is, among others, racist, transphobic, sexist, xenophobic, ableist, and fatphobic. I learned from the study participants that being an advocate entails admitting the harm of these systems and acknowledging that the US medical and psychological policies and clinicians alike often harm the very people that they're supposed to be supporting. As an advocate, I listen carefully to clients' needs, whether they are looking for surgeries or hormones or a kind and thoughtful medical doctor, and I amplify their voices so that their concerns and their hopes are acknowledged and supported. So, trying very hard to keep within my time. So please check out this book. It's amazing. It is such an honor to be part of it. And I appreciate your time here today.
Thank you, Abby. So I don't exactly want to say save the best for last, because all of you are fantastic. And we also have a number of contributors who couldn't make it with us today. And I really also want to thank those who really made a heroic effort, which are Sean from 2:30 in the morning in London, Susan, who can't hardly stand up because she has vertigo, and of all people, Jacob, who is who's the co-editor of this volume. Jacob has had one difficulty after another during the putting together this book. And to cap it off, Jacob got a very, very bad case of COVID in late July. And really, this is the first, I think, Jacob, this is the first time I've seen you since then. And that Jacob has really been, you know, really felled. And I'm incredibly grateful for all that you've done and grateful that you're here tonight. Reverend Jakob Hero-Shaw is one of the co-editors of Transkeit. He is the coordinator of the Trans Roundtable at CLGS and a faculty member of the Trans Seminarian Leadership Cohort. He is the senior pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Tampa, and his greatest joy is raising two amazing kids, Mima and Ruben, with his husband, Alan. So, with no further ado, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, and thank you to all the contributors who, some of you, it's the first time I'm seeing your faces, but I feel like I know you very, very well because I've read and read and read many times over all of your pieces. So I was able to contribute a couple of pieces to this text. And by the way, look at this in 3 dimensions and everything. Here's the book. And what I wanted to share with you in just a few minutes tonight is my interview with Kate Bornstein, which was a wonderful chance to just chat with her. We met by phone in June of 2020, which you know, in the time of the COVID era, who knows how long ago that was. Time no longer exists. But I had known Kate for a few years, but did not know her well, and it was really quite an amazing opportunity. So we started our conversation talking about pronouns, and you know, as conversations in trans community often start. And she said, "My gender in my mind is a continuum. My gender is 72 years old, and during those 72 years, I've insisted on every single pronoun you can think of, and some more that you can't think of." For Kate, the conversation was much deeper than the simplified suggestion of a small word that tells a bigger story. It would be disingenuous of me to say that any pronoun you use is wrong. I enjoy hearing what people decide to use for me, and that tells me more about them than I could ever say about me. There's so much there's so much value in the lived experiences and identities of others. As activists, religious leaders, community members, allies, and strangers, it can be difficult to find a point of connection with one another. In many ways, asking for pronouns is a shorthand version of showing solidarity with trans and non-binary people. We affirm when we say pronouns because pronouns cannot be taken for granted as obvious as to assume a person's pronouns without asking can do real harm. So after some discussion about the pronouns, we settled on she for this discussion. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We talk about religious identity and I'm going to skip to the part about allyship. So Kate offers this wisdom about allies. She says, I think that allyship is a good-hearted impulse and action an impulse and action to act on behalf of someone for their rights or to lessen their suffering. It's a good-hearted intention. Allies can be powerful and helpful, and allies can also be harmful and stand in the way of the work that needs to be done. She offers this example when I asked her if allyship could be a mitzvah. She says it can be. She offers this example. If someone says, she offers this example of when it can't be. If someone says, Kate Bornstein is non-binary, this is how she identifies, and I'm an ally of hers. And then someone else says, Kate Bornstein is just a man. And then my ally, she says, punches that person in the nose. It's not a mitzvah. Kate explains that allyship cannot be a mitzvah if the allyship is broken by hostile interaction. And sad to say, all too frequently, without training, allies tend to act in ways that the people they are defending wouldn't act. And that kind of breaks the allyship, she says. Allies will benefit from searching inward for clarity about their own intentions. Kate suggests seeking the points of similarity. At what point do you identify with a group you are planning to be an ally? In allyship, we need to see what it is that connects us. I think it is important that we name the point of connection. Otherwise, it's, look at me, what I did for these poor people. And that's the bad part of allyship. The question for Kate becomes one of values. In stepping into the space of values, we find that solidarity is perhaps the best model for connection. And I invite you to read more about what she says about solidarity and identities. And I'll wrap it up here, but I want to also just say a big thank you to Jane and this incredible journey that we've been on together. It's continuing as we promote this work, and just thank you to everybody who contributed and everybody who showed up this evening to learn about this book. And as others have said, please reach out to the librarians in your life and ask for this to be in the libraries.
Thank you, Jacob. As you can see, this book contains theory, history, biographies, the stories of our pioneers, the contributions of people like Noach Dizmura, who's here tonight, but told me he was too verklempt, just come from work to read from his amazing chapter. Personal stories, there's poetry, songs, an amazing diversity. I think when Jacob and I first talked about this book, what was most on our mind was that it spoke many different voices of Jews and non-Jews, of trans people and non-binary people and cis people who are our allies, of different religious denominations. We have Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, secular, of racial diversity and age diversity, that we really wanted to do include in the 21 chapters of this book are so many ways of understanding this complex and important topic. I have to say, and just in closing, I and Jacob and I really wanted to, but particularly me, wanted to call this book Transkeit. And the one thing that our publishers said is, no one will know what that means. And in order to make sure that people know what it means, you just have to explain what that is. And so I think we've been blessed by a really wonderful title that is Liberating Gender for Jews and Allies, the Wisdom of Transkeit. And I put into the chat how you buy it. And you can email any of the authors or Jacob or me, and we'll give you the author's discount. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't pitch the Jewish Queries series that CLGS puts on once a month of amazing Jewish queer people, topics of interest to queer Jews. And our next is this wonderful Queer Crip Revelation by Julia Watts-Belzer, who's an amazing human being. And I hope I'll see you all there on the 20th of October. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.